Hi, this is Sensei Steve from Motor City Aikido. One of the questions I've gotten from our students recently is how they can refinish their weapons. Since we've reopened, we've primarily been working on our partner drills, our patterns, our saburi, and our kume with the Joes and the bokken. This has caused increased weapon-on-weapon contact and wear and tear. So I'm going to talk about what's needed and what you need to do to refinish your weapons. So some of the items that you're going to need is sandpaper of different grits, starting at about an 80, working up to 420. You're going to need something to finish it with, like a Tung Oil or a Boiled Linseed Oil. I don't recommend a varnish or a lacquer. I'll explain that in a little bit. I'd recommend gloves for when you're doing the sanding. Now, when you're refinishing and applying the oil, you can use gloves if you don't want to get your hands messy. If you don't mind, just wash your hands. And a lint-free paper towel so as you can wipe off each coat as you're applying. So now, one thing that I've done is I've done a little bit of research on the different types of oils and their prices. And between the Tung Oil and the Boiled Linseed Oil, which, moving on, if I say linseed, I mean boiled linseed oil. There's a difference. There is a price difference. So Tung Oil is much more expensive. If you don't already have some lying around, for a pint-sized container of Tung Oil is about $14. Check that at my local hardware store. If you use Boiled Linseed Oil, a quart is $10. It's a little bit less expensive, a little more readily available, but there's differences between Tung Oil and Boiled Linseed Oil. Now, they're both plant-based. They are both food-safe and non-toxic. The biggest difference is linseed oil has a slight yellowish or an orange tint to it when it finishes drying, whereas Tung Oil, it dries clear. So whatever your wood looks like when it's sanded is primarily what it's going to look like when you finish with Tung Oil. Linseed oil will darken it, but it's personal preference, really. Tung Oil is a little bit more of a durable finish, and it's more water resistant, but both of them absorb into the wood. It's not a coating. It's actually going to soak into the wood and make it more durable and help it to last longer. Either one is fine. Whichever one you want to work with, again, that's personal preference. The biggest difference is, again, the color. So this is Sensei Jennifer's bokken. As you can see, it needs to be refinished. It's got a lot of indentations, and it's got some discoloration here from working with tires. Sometimes we set up a tire and we'll strike the tire for control drills so that we control the bounce. Well, it picks up some of the rubber coating. Now, this one hasn't been refinished, but mine has. Now, I used Boiled Linseed Oil when I refinished mine, so you can see it has a darker color to it. The grains stand out a little different. I personally like the look of it, but again, it's personal preference. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be resurfacing Sensei Jennifer's Joe and her bokken with Tung Oil. So one of the things I also did too is there's some custom manufacturers of bokken, such as Blizniaks and Kingfisher, out there make fantastic equipment. It's pricier, so if you want to spend more, you can. But even these ones that were bought online years ago still work just fine. They're just mass-produced. But Blizniaks sells a refinishing kit, and that's what they do. So they send you all the grits that you need, refinishing instructions, a little bottle of Tung Oil, which this is more than enough to do 2 weapons, possibly 2 times. And they also send you an N95 mask so that when you're sanding it, you're not going to get any of the sawdust in your nose. This is actually, I really like this. This kit is $8. It's all pre-packaged. They send you everything you need. That's all you really need to take care of a weapon. If you have all the sandpaper around, that's great. Sandpaper's not that expensive if you need to go buy some. It's the oil that's expensive. You don't want to buy a big bottle of oil if you're only going to use it for a couple times. So this is, trying it out is a good thing. So what I'll be doing is I'll be taking Sensei Jennifer's Joe and bokken, sanding them down, starting with an 80 grit, all the way up to a 320 or a 400 grit, and then once that's done, I'm going to get it ready for finishing with oil, and I'll show that process a little bit later. Okay, well, I finished off with the first round of 80 grit, and thankfully I bought 2 of the Blizniak refinishing kits because 1 square of 80 grit I was not able to finish it. I had to open up the second pack and use the other 80 grit sandpaper to finish it off. There were more irregularities in the surfaces than I expected, especially on the handle. So I used the extra sandpaper to smooth it out as best as possible, and uneven spots are now gone as best as possible. So, but huge difference from what it did look like. All those indentations, I was able to sand all those out. Obviously the rubber marks from the tire are gone. Really interesting pattern on the wood itself. So I don't believe this is the same wood. If not, it's from a different spot than mine was. Even though it was made by the same people, bought from the same company. It's probably why they call it select hardwoods. You never know what you're going to get. But I'm going to move on to the next grits and go all the way up to the final grit. And then I'll start on the Joe. And once I get all of this completed, I'll show you how I'm going to refinish it with the Tung Oil and how I do it, and the times it takes, between coats and curing. So we'll see how this goes. So to give you an example of how you can tell that the sanding's working, so that's just a light sanding I've done so far with the 80 grit on the Joe. So all those pock marks, those are the indentations. That's what we're trying to sand out. Now obviously it's going to remove some material, but it's going to make it smoother, and once we reapply the coat, it's going to be even stronger. Okay, I finished with all the sanding. I've gone all the way up to the 400 grit that was provided. Everything's all nice and smooth. Really turned out nice. There's a couple small spots where, like I said, deep dents. I'm not worrying too much about that because it's going to happen again. I don't want to take too much material off. But all in all, very pleased with the results. Everything is very smooth, very clean. And I'm kind of digging the pattern on this. It almost looks like freckles. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this looks once it gets oiled up. It will be more this color with the Tung Oil. Like I said, if I use the Boiled Linseed Oil, it would get a darker color like this. And while I think that would look very cool, these are not my weapons. So I'm going to do them with the Tung Oil, so it retains this lighter color. But that is for another time. All in all, sanding with the 80 grit, getting the varnish off, cleaning up a lot of those indentations, smoothing out the majority of the inconsistent surfaces. With that and everything else, took probably hour 15 minutes, taking a couple breaks in between. The longest time is the 80 grit, getting that initial surface coating off, getting some of those indentations out. Actually, I had to go buy another 80 grit piece of sandpaper. I had bought 2 of the kits from Blizniak. The 180 grit square in each pack wasn't enough. I had to use 2 of them just for the bokken alone. I had to go buy an additional one to do the Joe. So that's one thing, if I would recommend to him when he sends it out, send at least a couple of the 80 grit in each pack, because sometimes depending on the surface you're cleaning up, and maybe for his equipment, one might be sufficient. But with this, with the type of varnish that was on there, I needed a little bit more. So, and also I noticed too in his packs, the types of grits were inconsistent from each pack. One pack had a 60, one pack had an 80, another pack had 2 100s, another one had a 100 and a 150. So each pack varied in the amount of grit. But that's no big deal. I can, like I said, I'll list out the grits that were used and can be used for this. They can all be found at the local hardware store. A 1 foot square runs for about $1.40. So buying 6 or 7 different types of grits, it's not that expensive, and then you have extra for later. So I will be back in a little bit to start the oiling process. And I'll go with that, explain everything that I'm doing, and we'll go from there. Sanding's all done on both the bokken and the Joe. Again, gone through all this before. It's all nice and clean, no issues. Everything's been kind of touched up. There's still a couple little spots on the Joe, but that's not a problem. So now what we're going to do is we're going to coat it with Tung Oil. Okay, now again, I bought a couple little packages from Blizniak Bokkens. It comes with Tung Oil. So there's two oils I mentioned before that can be used. Tung Oil and Boiled Linseed Oil. Tung Oil dries harder, it dries clear, and it's waterproof. The difference with that with linseed oil is linseed oil, as I mentioned before, has a little bit of a yellowish and orange tinge to it when it dries, so it tends to darken the wood. This is going to be more of the natural color that's going to be on the weapons. The only other thing really to consider too is drying time. Now the instructions that I've seen for Tung Oil is that you apply a coat every hour. So we're going to apply a light coat, doesn't take much oil, and let it sit for an hour. Then we're going to come back and we're going to wipe it. I got lint-free towels, so it's not going to leave a residue, nothing on the towels. So we're going to wipe it clean, apply another coat, let it sit for an hour. We're going to do that continuously for the next few hours. Pardon me. And what we're looking for is the surface of the weapon to be wet. Now when we apply oil, it's going to start soaking in to the material. The areas that it still has material or oil that it can take in, it's going to look dry, kind of like smooth and a little shiny. The areas where it's taken in all the oil that it can, it's going to look wet because it can't absorb the oil. So you always want to look at the surface. It's going to be hard to tell in here with the camera, but as I look at it with the light, I'll be able to see where the sides are that look shiny and smooth and where the spots are that'll look wet. If they look shiny and smooth, you keep applying oil. That's as simple as that. Now, one thing to consider too, if you're using boiled linseed oil, is that one of the byproducts of its drying process is that it generates heat. Now, if I didn't mention it before, that can cause rags to combust. If you just take the rags and you throw it in a trash can or throw it in a bag as you're working on them, that can cause potentially those to catch fire. There hasn't really been many reported cases of Tung Oil causing that, but just in case, what I've done, I got a bucket with some water. So as I apply each coat, I come back, you wipe off the previous coat with a rag. I'm going to be throwing it in this bucket so it soaks in, so there's not going to be a chance of anything happening. Again, I'm not using linseed oil, so there's very little chance of that happening, but as a precaution, I do that either way. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do pardon, is open up my Tung Oil here. Now, I use gloves for this. You can use your bare hands, you can use a towel. They recommend using bare hands because the heat of your hands is going to help open up some of the pores on the wood so that the oil absorbs better. I'm not going to do that because I hate washing my hands that many times. So, gloved up. Oh, probably forgot to mention how I'm going to dry these. So what I've done is, in the past, I've hung some fishing line in my shed, and as I apply the oil, I just stick it back up on those lines. Being that I'm doing this for a video, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. So what I did was I had some extra 2x4 from another project. So I cut them down, two pieces 18 inches, 6 boards at 6 inches, kind of fastened them in, drilled a hole, and got some fishing line. So I just got a couple hooks with a fishing line hooked to it. So what I'll be able to do is after I apply the oil, I just take it, set it on the fishing line, and that's the least amount of contact that's going to come into these weapons while they're drying. Some people just lay them down on a work surface, or they'll put them on a towel or a blanket. That way, that can actually soak up the oil into the other material. I don't want to do that. Fishing line is probably the least amount of contact that's going to come into these, so that's why I'm using it. And it only took me about 10 or 15 minutes to cut all this up and put it together. It's not that big of a deal. And now I have a usable, block in case I ever want to do this again. Okay, so on to the oiling process. So it doesn't take much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of oil down, and I'm just going to start rubbing it in. Now as I get going, it's going to You see it's starting to get a little shiny probably. I'm going to apply more oil. Again, like I said, it doesn't take much, so I don't want to overdo it. Plus I got to make sure I have enough for at least 4 or 5 coats. I'm going to go across the whole surface. Like I said, it's not a thick coat. We don't need a thick coat. We don't need it dripping. We'll feel a little sticky with the gloves, but again, that's fine. And you can already see just that one coat of oil. Look at that nice texture that's coming out. All right, so this one's done. I'm going to set it here so it can start to dry. Now I'll start doing the same thing with the Joe. Again, a little goes a long way. Also too, the more you put on, the more that's going to drip off. We don't want that. We don't want to waste the oil. Also too, we don't want to have to worry about cleaning up the surface that we're working with too much. Alright, so since this is the initial coat, I'll put a little bit more on. Plus, Tung Oil doesn't have as strong of a smell as linseed oil. Like I said, when linseed oil dries, it leaves an oily smell. I mean, it's a definite difference in smell. So now I got this done. I'm going to take my gloves and my bucket of water. Later, when I use the lint-free towels, again, I'll throw it in my bucket of water, so we don't have any accidents. So this is going to sit for an hour. Okay, I will be back in an hour, and I will wipe off the first coat and apply a second coat. And again, I'm going to do that until it looks like the wood isn't absorbing any more oil. Once that's done, I'm just going to let them sit for a couple days just to cure. It's probably not going to take that long to cure, but I'm going to let it. So again, it's already got a really nice light brown coating to it, which it may darken up just a little bit, but just that first coat, I'm really happy with the progress. It's been an hour, so we're going to check these. And again, put my gloves on because I really hate washing oil off my hands. Okay, so looking at the Joe, so there are some areas that seem to have more oil than others, especially on the bokken. So let me bring it around and see if I can get a close-up view of this. Let's see if this works. So looking, there are some spots that, again, look wet. That's where oil is not soaking in, or I'm sorry, strike that, reverse it. If it's looking wet, that means that it has soaked in as much oil as it can. The smooth, shiny areas still need more oil. So we're going to go, first off, we're going to wipe off this coat. We can start with a fresh coat. And all it takes, again, all you're doing is just using a lint-free towel and just wiping off the excess. Now, again, into our bucket of water and back to applying more coats. Also, to make sure, you coat the ends. That needs to be coated as well. And it doesn't take a whole lot, especially since we're doing multiple coats. A little bit more on this side. Since I got extra oil in my gloves right now, I'm going to go over a little bit more on the Joe. Just get a little bit more on there. Okay. Bucket of water. Clean off my bottle. So again, I'm going to come back in another hour and check it. The more I see the Joe and the bokken staying wet, which means the more that oil has soaked in and it can't do much more. That's good. I'll probably expect to put about 5, maybe 6 coats. And after the last coat, I'm just going to let them sit for a couple days, let them finish curing, and we'll go from there. So I'm not going to show the next coats. Same thing with sanding. Nobody wants to watch someone sit around and sand. You've seen the process a couple times. You know what to do. I'll come back when I'm finished and we'll look at the final product. Okay, we've gotten to the last coat. I finished the last coat an hour ago. I didn't obviously record a whole bunch of the coatings because you saw the first one. Every single one is exactly the same way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the last coat and we are going to just check and see where we're at. So there may be some spots that you can see on that. Mostly, there's a few spots like right in here and a little bit on this side that are still that little dry and shiny look I mentioned. But everything else is still pretty wet. I'm going to do, come up over here. Maybe you might be able to pick it up on the camera here. It's like spots like right here. Now I could keep doing coats, but at this point I'm pretty happy with the results. It's mostly soaked in. There comes a point in time where you can keep going. It's not really advantageous because these are going to get, weapon on weapon contact. It's going to get used. It's not like this is a piece of art or a side table or anything like that. So I'm happy with the results right now. So I'm going to go through and do the last cleanup. So really all it is, like I said, you have a clean lint-free cloth. This is just lint-free shop towels. Just getting all that excess off. And one thing I've been doing too is I've been wiping the fishing line, just getting any of the excess off. That way it's not going to beat up in a certain area. So, same thing with the bokken. Just going to go through, wipe it off. Make sure you get it really good. The ends, even this little part right here where the suba goes. Just want to try to get everything off here because now what we're going to do is we're just going to let it set. Now obviously we don't have class for a few days, so these are going to have a chance to just sit and harden and cure. They're usable within the first couple days. Reading some curing times can go as long as a month, but again, it's usable during that time. So I'm going to again finish up here with my bucket of water. Now that I'm all done, I'll dispose of that properly so we don't make a big mess. And this little jar of tung oil, see, I've used less than half on both of these. 8 coats, I think 8 coats. So it doesn't take much. So if I ever need to do these again, I have more than enough to do another couple weapons. So, all right, hands are clean. Let's get the rest of this last little bit of oil off now that I have the gloves off. Actually, it's got a really nice texture to it right now. Nice feel to it. I think these are going to work out very nicely. I'm very pleased with the results. They came out very nice. Much nicer than the original varnish. Saw from before that little bit of the reddish tint to it. So yeah, these are turning out very nice. It's got enough of a grip to it where you can hold on to it. And again, over time, that's going to change the heat of your palms, sweat. It's all going to wear that down just a little bit. It's going to work it in. So there you have it. Refinishing your Joe and your bokken. Simple material to use. It's just time consuming. You don't need to make something like this. I chose to because I had the wood lying around and, well, I do that sometimes. So, yeah, very happy. Any questions or anything, obviously anybody, feel free to ask. But it's pretty simple and readily available materials. And I'm sure Sensei Jennifer will be very happy with her refinished equipment because it looks like it's back to brand new. Thanks.